We live in an age today where the mechanical watch is seen as a luxury item. The more expensive it gets, the more it resembles a piece of jewellery, which is unfortunate. The appeal of this anachronistic object that tells you the time is not something that is greatly appreciated in the world today. The disposable technology culture, the new generations of younger watch owners that are more interested in applications than anything tangible. You can spend $5 and buy a watch today that is more accurate, more reliable, dependable than some of the most advanced horology pieces in the world. So when we segue into this area of the two-tone watch, the two-tone sports watch, it is a great subject of debate, and I don't think we ever will be able to fully rationalize where it sits exactly. The opinions that we have on this subject is purely subjective. Something that is luxury, something that is jewelry, but something that's also functional. And where exactly did this all originate from, and how do we see it today? These watches could appeal to you because of years gone by. You could have aspired to own a watch like this because they very much were the rave and the fashion 20 years ago. But now especially, there seems to be a resurgence in this area as well. Fashion and trends come and go, but in the case of the two-tone sports watch, they seem quite eternal. When we look back a few hundred years to the origins of watchmaking, and when watches themselves were more accessible, easy to own, we could say were becoming more mainstream. The use of gold as the primary material for cases was a very popular choice. We look back to the dawn of time, the use of gold in virtually all areas, not because of its value, but because of its potential. It's heat resistant, it's chemically inert, it's malleable, it's ductile, it doesn't lose its color. It is one of the most fascinating materials on this planet and has always been a subject of worship, we could say. It represents so much of humanity and our history. So because of its excellent properties, we see it being used with pocket watches and wristwatches, and it always has been this material that has high status attached to it. So the question is, how did we see two-tone integrated into the steel sports watch, into the steel watch format? My belief is that it was done in such a way to make the watch not only more functional, but also affordable. We know that the downside of gold is that it's very expensive and it's a very soft material. So incorporating it into a steel package allows it to be not only cheaper to own, gives you that bit of elegance, that contrasting color. It's also wearable without looking ostentatious. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the two-tone sports watch really made its name in the 1970s and the 1980s. Maybe it was a fashionable choice of the time. Maybe it was because of excess demand. Maybe it was the manufacturer's idea to cheapen the manufacturing process, to make these watches more attainable, to restrict the amount of gold they're sending out with individual pieces. But what we see today is that the aesthetic quality of two-tone hasn't died. It hasn't fallen to the wayside. We could call it an outlier, but it is still just as popular, just as in demand. Almost, we could say, on par with the solid steel finishes. There are a few watches that come to mind that are very much representative of this era, this use of two contrasting materials. The ones that I think of first, the two-tone Datejust and the two-tone Submariner. I would say those watches are the two most recognizable in this era, which is quite fascinating. There were many more options out there, obviously, but these two have seemed to have lasted the longest. And maybe it is because we saw these watches worn at a time when they were at the peak of their popularity. They were featured on the wrists of many actors in movies. And it's something that has epitomized the culture and the time when these watches were at their height. We now see that the popularity of the two-tone sports watch has moved into different categories, where we now see contrasting steel and bronze, or a huge fan favorite, the contrasting steel and rose gold. As time has moved on, the appreciation for yellow gold in a two-tone format has dwindled slightly. It still is extremely popular, but it also looks like there is a common interest shared amongst owners and collectors for two-tone materials that are not so expressive, that are a little bit more understated. So if we are to talk about these materials from a practical point of view, yes, there is a juxtaposition, especially when we see it equipped on a sports watch, something that is made to do extreme tasks. Now, more than ever before, these watches are not seeing the same rigorous use that they did when the sports watch was at its height. The two-tone sports watch falls into a different category, therefore. It can take some of the most utilitarian-focused instruments and turn them into something of high fashion, of something that has a more dual quality to it. And it is interesting when you think of it that way. Though yes, the watch can be used for the same tasks that you would use your solid steel watches for, The end result is that you find most of these pieces are more highly polished, they're more prone to scratching. So it is a very conflicting subject. But in a strange twist of fate, I find it also perfectly epitomizes the way we see the modern sports watch today. An instrument that in many ways is no longer a tool, something that costs X amount of money that will never see the same amount of use and abuse that its predecessors did. A watch that is largely bought and worn on special occasions. And the question that we can ask, is there any reason, purpose, practicality behind having two-tone materials on a watch, above and beyond the aesthetics, the visual contrast, the third or fourth color tone that makes the watch look a lot more appealing? The two-tone watch sits very neatly in this category of being an outlier, a combination of materials that when combined can often work so well together. It can give you this feeling beyond just being a watch into something that is more of an achievement, a trophy, an award. But on the flip side, if we are talking purely from practicality and usability, the watch can lose some of its intent, some of the most important features that really defined it in the first place. Regardless of opinion, the two-tone sports watch is a very interesting case study, one that is not definitive and one that I believe never will be. But for an owner, someone who wants to add a watch to their collection that is more precious without breaking the bank, the two-tone watch manages to intersect this area perfectly.